1 minute, and then we'll start. No, you'll be standing. Okay, I think we have most of our audience seated, so I think we'll begin. First of all, I do want to apologize for being a few minutes late. I try to go out and greet as many beforehand as possible, which leads to lots of chatter and conversation. So it's great to meet you all, and if I didn't get out to see you tonight earlier, I hope to talk to you afterwards. So we really, really appreciate all of you who come to our programs, and we welcome all of you who are first-timers. And I met a couple of people who said this is their second and third time. So we kind of got everybody across the range. I'm Janet Dolan. I'm a member of the Minnesota Peace Initiative, and I want to welcome you to our spring program. And we want to welcome all of those, and there are a lot of them tonight online, so we want to welcome everybody who's joining us online. For those of you who are attending for the first time, and I know there are some of you because I met you, let me tell you who we are and why we do these programs. Norway is a trusted global peacemaker. Therefore, the Minnesota Peace Initiative provides a forum for us to delve into the deeply challenging global issues of our day. And like James Madison, we believe that a well-informed electorate is essential to an effective democracy. We bring in experts, we have them this evening, to share their knowledge and insights so that we can become better informed citizens. Our topic tonight is a major global issue facing all of us, and yet, for some reason, we just choose not to talk about it. And I think the reason is because it's a very big and thorny issue. And it has both economic and cultural dimensions. And most importantly, it's going to be very challenging to make some of the changes needed to prepare for this coming phenomenon that we call the silver tsunami. For the past 60 years, industrial countries around the world have seen a significant drop in birth rates. So while the baby boomer generation, and there's a few of us here tonight, while our generation is huge, the generations behind us, Gen X, Millennials and Gen Y, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are significantly smaller. So what's the problem? In fact, one of the gentlemen I spoke with said the same thing to me. It seems like just yesterday we were focused on population control. Now we're worried about not having enough people. So which is it? And it appears, and we're going to hear more about it tonight. So luckily for us, we have with us tonight 4 experts who think and speak and write about these issues. Our guests this evening are Kent Lee, Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt, who will be joining us virtually, I hope, Dr. Luc Pardue, and state demographer Susan Brower. We will begin with an opening by Kent Lee. Mr. Lee is the president and CEO of Eastview Information Services. And in that capacity, he travels the world advising countries on issues of census taking and how to use it. He will lay a foundation for us in terms of the numbers. How are they collected? How are they sliced and diced? And most importantly, how trustworthy are they? How do we arrive at the population data from which we then determine the scale of the coming silver tsunami? We will then turn to our panelists. Each will give a short opening statement to introduce themselves to you and their area of expertise. The panel and I then will spend a few minutes on questions that I have for them, and then we will turn to your questions. For those of you joining us virtually, please submit your questions online through the Q&A function on your computer. For those of you here in person, we have provided cards for you to write your questions, and just pass them to the aisle, and members of our committee will be collecting them. And I will try to ask as many questions as time allows. So with that, we're now going to turn to our first presenter, Kent Lee, who will share with us the amazing art of census development and how we quantify, calculate, and deal with the coming tsunami. Kent? Oh, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Janet. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. One of the board members of Norway House, Mark Knapp, was kind enough to extend an invitation to me to join the presentation here. Mark and I worked together a few years and recently connected again at an event in London. So Mark, thank you very much for this opportunity. Our theme tonight, the silver tsunami, I think is quite a real phenomenon, but it's also just one of many demographic issues that have come to be widely discussed. The population bomb of the 1960s got a lot of attention. Some of you here probably remember that. The author of that and the proponent of a line of thinking that humanity would soon outgrow the planet with mass starvation and environmental degradation was a gentleman known as Paul Ehrlich. Where did Paul get his information about this? Did he just make it up, or there's a lot of information sources out there? While I personally don't know much about the silver tsunami matter, my role here tonight is to talk about information sources, in this case, sources that shed light on demographic phenomenon. After I'm done speaking in a few minutes, you'll get to hear the real experts and who actually know about our theme. But I'll start by nerding out a little bit on population censuses, which are one of my favorite genres of information. At our organization, Eastview, one of the initiatives we have is to gather and digitally aggregate literally every population census we can find since the 19th century. There's some exceptions, mainly those censuses from major Western developed countries. We're Eastview, after all. Our focus is on source materials that inform scholarly analysis and policymaking, which come from the East, so Eastern Europe and Russia and the former Soviet states, from China and the Far East, from the Middle East, from South and Southeast Asia, and from Africa and Latin America, which aren't exactly the East, but still. We have this long-standing, in fact, permanent publishing effort called the Global Census Archive. Oh, I'm sorry, I should ask for a slide 2 after this one. Thank you. In this program, we scour the earth for population census publications. We're hardly the first to do this, and a lot of other organizations have similar missions, but we try to be uniquely useful in various ways. Population censuses are pretty interesting. Slide 3, please. Classically, they are enormous endeavors undertaken once every 10 years in most countries. In the USA, the 2020 census involved perhaps 500,000 temporary workers, and it's basically on the same scale everywhere on the planet. There's huge organizational work to be done in advance, not the least of which is preparing very detailed maps of the areas to be covered, including defining the boundaries of each census block. Geographically, there's incredible detail, and for us at Eastview, this kind of geographic fidelity is the holy grail of population census data. Slide 4, please. Once you get outside most of the developed Western countries and a very small number of developed Eastern countries like Japan, government officials are mostly not happy or willing to make such detailed geographic census data available. Apart from the geography, there's a major issue of questionnaires. What will people, in general the heads of households, be asked? Population censuses are like snowflakes in this respect. No two are alike. Every census round in every country, and we've monitored over 2,500 census rounds, involves some new or modified or deleted questions from the previous one. As you can imagine, take gender identity or something of a relatively recent issue, these are contentious questions. Slide 5, please. Not amongst not just amongst the public at large, but even amongst census planners behind closed doors. So part of our mission is to get both the actual census questionnaires, which are often in multiple languages for a given country, as well as planning group discussion documents for each census. We see this as an essential part of the historical record. Classic categories of population census include, first of all, age and sex, which helps tremendously with building so-called population pyramids. Slide 6, please. That helps tell an interesting story for each respective country or geographic region. Here we have just 4. The one that's most pyramidal is the Democratic Republic of Congo, shows massive numbers of young people. The one that's least pyramidal is South Korea, which shows a historically tiny number of people in the age of 0 to 4 range here. The United States is in the lower left, and China is in the lower right. Other classic categories are education, marital status, household size, employment, housing conditions, migration, language, ethnicity, and religion, which is a total powder keg issue, and in many countries causes lots of issues ranging from a decision not to gather the data at all, or to keep it restricted once gathered, or to deal with the blowback if the people are surprised or unhappy with published results. So how accurate is this information? Slide 7. Absolutely all of us here tonight are familiar with another type of government census called the 1040s, or tax filings. And we all know that those things are 100% accurate and complete, right? Well, so it is with population censuses. Sometimes they apparently give wrong or incomplete results. Naturally, there are efforts to improve and streamline or to cross-check with other sources. One method that's increasingly being used is called the registration approach. This differs from the classic enumeration approach, which many of us here have experienced. If you get a letter or a questionnaire from the government, fill it out, send it back to the government, and if you don't receive anything, they show up on your doorstep. This is one of these 500,000 enumerators that are hired every 10 years. A registration approach takes advantage of many different ways that people are registered with the government: birth and death records, employment, licenses of various kinds, property records, identity cards, and so on. Probably this will only expand with the role of the digital private sector and mobile phones, social media, and other accounts. It's cheaper, it doesn't involve an army of temporary workers, and it can be conducted more frequently, but they're not without their own problems. Apart from the accuracy or the lack thereof, next slide, slide 8, please. It's still a big issue that in many countries, census data is lacking just because it just has not been generated. In Africa, of the 54 generally recognized countries, 20 of them have not had population censuses in the last 10 years, and 7 of them haven't had censuses in the last 20 years. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the country that some estimates put as contributing to the most growth on the African continent of population in the next 75 years, hasn't had a census in over 40 years. A number of countries still treat census as state secrets, at least, and certainly at the most detailed levels. North Korea is a great example. Less known countries, Turkmenistan. Ukraine has not had a formal population census since 2001. So what about the future of population censuses? Next slide, please. Janet helped me frame some questions prior to this meeting. One question was, what's the current population on each continent, but for Antarctica, no counting penguins? And it got me thinking. Some of this has to do with advances in technology, especially remote sensing. In general, this means high-resolution imagery from satellite sensors. With this approach, you can count not only your own people, but also other countries' people. And in fact, you can count all the people. And why stop counting people? You could, by such methods, penguins have been counted. And guess what? A satellite-based imagery of population census of emperor penguins in Antarctica discovered that the likely number of penguins is like 600,000, which was twice what was expected based on earlier census approaches. from scientists here. The U.S. government has been counting people from space since the late 1990s on a global scale, and it's called Landscan. It's done by the U.S. Department of Energy with a ton of funding from the Pentagon. The census counts up the people in the world every single year and exists in both classified and publicly available versions. They do this in order to determine at-risk populations in the event of nuclear war or other so-called nuclear events. Interesting stuff, and fortunately most of it is available to scholars and the public. But for arcane reasons, the Landscan approach to global population counts no one in Antarctica, and even though there's always at least 1,000 scientists there in the winter and 5 times that, including tourists in the summer. But we know the number of penguins here. So the Russians take it one step further. Last slide, please. I guess that was Landscan. One more slide there. So the Russians take it one more step further. They count people, at least their people, in space. So the last 3 censuses in Russia have also included the number of Russians orbiting the planet here. So it's another thing to worry about, or perhaps it's a solution as we move towards the silver tsunami. Thank you, and I'll turn things over to our panel here.
Thank you very much, Kent. I could have saved you a little bit of time. I have been to Antarctica, and I can tell you there are 500,000 penguins in Antarctica, because I saw most of them. So anyway. Our next panelist, do we have Nicholas? This is the part I was most nervous about.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we don't want her. Let's get
I'm
Nicholas.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Nicholas, at least your voice is here.
I see me. Am I coming through?
We have your voice, Nicholas.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We're just
Am
trying
I-
to get the virtual camera going.
On? Can you all hear me? I can see you.
There. Yay.
Can
Welcome.
you hear me?
Yes, yes. Very good. I'll just give you I'll give a very quick introduction. And I wanted to tell you, first of all, we put bios for each of our speakers on your chairs, so you've got those. And so I would like at this time to introduce our first panelist, and that's Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt. And he's joining us virtually from Washington, D.C. And Nicholas holds the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute. And I have to tell you that when our committee was looking, we spent some time finding the experts on the subject that we're going to discuss. And when we began looking, and we were zeroing in on Nicholas Eberstadt because his name came up over and over and over. And we would talk to others, and they would say to us, Nicholas, he's the dean on this subject. So we want you to know we got the dean on the subject of the silver tsunami and on the population decline. So we're very lucky to have him this evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Well, that was such a lovely introduction. I don't think that I can improve upon it. Can I go home now? Maybe not. Um, Kent, I thought you gave an absolutely wonderful presentation about what we know and how we know it. And that's a super background. I love Eastview. I'm a big consumer of Eastview myself. So thumbs up to all the work that you all do. I'll be very brief because I'm mindful of time. Um, we have to keep in mind that human beings are not like Paul Ehrlich's insects. He was an expert, the man who wrote The Population Bomb was an expert on insect population biology. That's how he got his tenure at Stanford. But humans are a little bit different from butterflies. Um, we're the most adaptable of all of the animals. We're the most ingenious of all of the animals. We're probably, to my way of thinking, the best problem solvers of all of the animals. That's why between 1900 and today, human beings have much more than doubled their planetary life expectancy. Our life expectancy has gone from about 30 years to 73 years today, we think, about 5 years higher than for the USA itself back in the 1950s. And that's the entire cause of the population explosion. It's been a health explosion. And that health explosion is continuing. What's been really radical in the past 3 generations has been the global march towards below replacement fertility, which the replacement level being a little bit over 2 births per woman per lifetime. Um, Back in the 1950s, there were only a few countries that had less than replacement level fertility. Today, almost 3/4 of the world's population has below replacement fertility. Um, if we keep that up, it's going to take us to a total planetary below replacement level, and that will in turn eventually lead to global depopulation. We've already got countries that are shrinking because of very, very low fertility. All of the East Asian countries, most of the European countries. What happens with depopulation, or excuse me, what happens with prolonged subreplacement fertility? 3 things happen. The first is that conventionally defined working age population peaks and then kind of shrinks indefinitely unless there's immigration. The same thing happens with total head count a little bit later on. The surprising thing that happens is that populations get gray, they get older. It's not so much the increase in life expectancy that we're enjoying, it's more the small families that kind of tilt the population pyramid upside down, the way Kent was talking about. Um, all of this means we have a very different world heading at us from the world we've been familiar with, where there's more consumers, more investors, more workers, more voters, more homeowners. Um, we've already cracked the formula for routinizing abundance. That's why the world's proportion of extremely poor people has been going down and down and down. And we can continue to prosper as a shrinking, aging society or set of societies or planet. But it's going to mean adapting. I'm cautiously optimistic that we can adapt because we're the most adaptable animal, but it's not going to happen by itself. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Our second presenter is Dr. Luc Pardue, who is a policy director at the Aspen Economic Strategy Group. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Luc Pardue.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming today for such for discussion of such an important topic. I'll just put that down here. I am the policy director of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group. We're a group devoted to advancing evidence-based solutions to some of the nation's most significant economic challenges, and this is certainly one of them. I'll take a little bit of time to maybe come back to the U.S. and give a little bit of data on the forces that the U.S. is facing when it comes to the global population shift, and then outline three very short consequences when we think about what the economic impacts of this demographic shift are for the country. And then I'm happy to dig in a little bit more to some of these consequences during the discussion. So within the U.S., these demographic shifts, demographic headwinds that we talk about come in twofold, as Nicholas said. They come in terms of the falling birth rate and rising life expectancy. In the U.S., we started to see declining birth rates around 2007. So after the baby boom, for many decades, the U.S. was at about that replacement level fertility of 2.1 births per woman. And then in 2007, the birth rate began to decline significantly and in a sustained fashion from 2007, when it was at 2.1 births per woman, to today in 2025, when it reached 1.57, which is a historic low for the U.S., a low that we haven't seen going back to pre-baby boom times. And then the second force is rising life expectancies. In the U.S., that's come in the form of about 8 years additional life expectancy from 1960, when a child born could expect to live to about 70 years, to 78 years of average life expectancy today. And again, as Nicholas said, those two forces come together to create the prospects of both a slower growing and eventually shrinking, and then an older population. So you have slow population growth and an aging population. So those are the two forces that I talk about specifically when I talk about demographic headwinds. And there are three economic impacts that in research that I've done with my colleagues we've outlined, and I'd like to highlight briefly. First of all, there are large impacts on our federal fiscal situation, as Jana outlined, and that's entirely due to the fact that most of our funding for old age entitlement programs come from tax receipts from current workers. So right now, there's about 25 elderly Americans for every member of the working age population, and that's expected to rise to 35 over the next 25 years. So we're going to see an increase in the size of the elderly population relative to workers paying into these systems, and so Social Security and Medicare are going to, we're going to have a harder time funding them. And in research that I've done with my colleague at the Federal Reserve, we've actually identified the aging of the population as the primary driver of the rising federal debt. And it's a simple math problem. We just don't have enough receipts coming in from workers to fund the obligations that are due to those retirees. So that's one. Number two is the impacts on business dynamism and labor market opportunities for younger workers. And this kind of comes in two forms. First of all, as the population ages, we've seen a reduction in entrepreneurship and business dynamism that characterizes the U.S. economy. The startup rate has fallen over the past few decades, and economists have identified the aging of the population as contributing to about 1/3 of the decline in U.S. startups. And so the aging of the population, the silver tsunami, is creating an environment of fewer new business opportunities and new job opportunities. And at the same time, older workers, as they live longer and healthier lives, are able to work in their jobs for a longer amount of time. And those jobs are often high-paying managerial roles. And what that actually is creating is a dynamic, what we call congestion in the workforce. So older workers are working longer, they're not retiring as early as they used to, and that means that folks in the middle of their career can't move into those open opportunities. And then that in turn means that younger workers don't have the career path to move up into those middle-paying jobs. So they're seeing flatter, lower-paying career trajectories. That's happening across the world, in Italy and Japan, where we're seeing this trend happen much earlier. They're more advanced in these trends, but we're seeing it appear in the US. And there's rigorous research that shows in communities where this is more pronounced, younger workers are experiencing greater underemployment in jobs that might not typically create or need a bachelor's degree, for instance. And that means, in turn, that those younger workers who are facing lower earnings prospects are having a harder time investing in starting a family, building a home, or investing in a home, investing in further education. And so that reduced business dynamism is having large negative effects for younger workers who are at the stage where they'd like to start a family. And then finally, and I think hopefully this might transition well into the next talk, is there's very significant impacts for state and local governments. These governments provide everyday services for residents, education, hospitals, transportation infrastructure. All of that takes high fixed costs, and that's easy to fund when there's a large and growing population, because you can spread those costs across a larger population. In the 2010s, about half of US counties lost population, and by 2025, that rose to 2/3 of all counties in the US are losing population. And so providing those services is much more difficult in an environment when there aren't more and more people to spread those costs. And so we're going to, as a country, as a state, as communities, face very difficult and politically difficult decisions over how to, as Nicholas said, adapt to this new future, although I'm confident we can. So thank you very much, and I look forward to digging in the conversation.
Nobody can accuse us of just bringing unicorns and rainbows to you. We're going to talk about some solutions to this too, but the numbers are pretty staggering. So our last speaker is actually a local speaker, and she is Susan Brower, and she is our Minnesota state demographer, as you saw from the bios on your chair. So it's my pleasure to introduce Susan Brower.
Everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looks like in Minnesota, this slowdown, what we've seen in recent years. I'll say I have a small office in state government, and part of what we do is talk to people about what's changing in Minnesota, especially state leaders, so that they can plan for some of the changes that we're going to talk about tonight. The other part of my job is to help prepare people for the census, and we're already begun to do that. And so just for your reference, that's who I am and what I do. The biggest demographic change that I'm telling people about in Minnesota is the slowdown in our population growth. This is a shift that's already well underway and will continue into the foreseeable future as far as I can see. And you can see here between 1860 and 1960, which is just after the state formed and became a state, and for the next 100 years, Minnesota grew by about 30,000 additional people each year. And that pace held pretty steady throughout this trend line, but you can see up until about 2010, that growth curve flattened out. And over the next 50 years, we project that growth will slow to about 7,000 people, additional people in Minnesota, rather than 30,000. And so this is what our trajectory looks like. Demographic trends move very slowly. They're very predictable. And this is kind of just how things play out. We expect to have them play out in Minnesota. Why is this happening right now? Well, growth is slowing because the state is aging, as we said, and aging just means that we have more people in high mortality age groups, we have more deaths, and we have fewer people who are the age to have children. And so what we're looking at here is showing you the slowed growth due to natural change. That just means if we take all the births in the state in any year and take away all the deaths, this used to be our own kind of internal engine or growth engine, and you can see over time, from 1960 or so, there are about 60,000 people added just from our own internal change. But by 2025, the most recent period, it's down to just 12,000. So we just had 12,000 more babies than we had people pass away. This is happening in Minnesota, as we heard. This is happening across the U.S. We're not alone. In 2025, 17 states actually were in what we call natural decline, where they have more deaths than they have births. It's the natural outcome of having these long life expectancies. I wouldn't say it's a crisis. It's just all of us living our lives where we are in our communities. We've talked a lot about that lower birth rate. This is what it looks like for Minnesota. That 2.1 number is kind of the magic number for if you reach that, you're going to continue over the long run to have population growth. And you can see that Minnesota is below that. We're a little higher than the US overall at 1.7, but well below replacement fertility. And in fact, every state in the US in the most recent data are below replacement fertility. So again, Minnesota's not alone. So what about migration? What's happening with that here? I'm not showing you domestic migration, which would show us that we tend to export more residents to other states than we gain. So we have small net losses of people leaving the state each year. But I am looking right now at international migration and what the trend has been. And both international and domestic migration become more important when we have that slower natural change unfolding. And you can see that over time, we had anywhere between about 5,000 to 15,000 additional people added because of international immigration. That really increased for a few years recently between 2022 and 2024. And that kept our growth rate much higher than it otherwise would have been. And that's attributable to humanitarian admits that came over the southern border. I'll just draw your attention to that last data point there, where we've seen very little migration in the last year. And so, you know, that's happened nationally. It's happened here in Minnesota. It looks like we've got slow growth into the foreseeable future, but for whatever happens with immigration. And so I will just leave you with Minnesota's picture and take questions from there. Thank you.
I guess we're supposed to feel better knowing everybody's in the same boat. It's just a big boat, that's all. So can we bring Nicholas up now for the remainder of the program so we can begin our questions? Anyone that has questions so far, and feel free to keep adding them, but just fill out your cards and then we will pick them up. Time goes by faster than you think, so the sooner you get your cards in, the better, the more of them I can answer, I can ask. So can you bring Nicholas up? Okay, well, I have my first question was for Nicholas, but I'm gonna wait till he comes up. So I'm gonna, hi there. Nicholas, you are our expert on the global level, and we're gonna get to solutions, I promise. But first of all, will you just describe what you think are the biggest consequences of it? You touched on your optimism. What do you think are the three biggest consequences of the population drop-off around the world?
Well, of course, the biggest consequence is going to be the shrinking of conventionally defined workforces and the relative increase in retirement age populations, and that's going to put stresses on our current pay-as-you-go social benefit systems all around the world. It's also going to put stresses on national productivity and savings rates unless we adjust. Another big change, which isn't usually spoken about because we don't actually collect the right numbers for this, is the radical changes it's going to mean in family structures and in extended families. I'll give you an extreme example in China, where the one-child policy, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's led to a situation where only children are begetting only children. And so we have a new family type rising in China without siblings, without cousins, without uncles, without aunts. That's not just interesting in a psychological and sociological way, that's got huge economic and other ramifications, because relying upon members of your family is so important economically as well as everything else. The third important thing to point to is the exception so far. The exception is sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is the main area of the world that hasn't gone into below replacement fertility. As best we can tell, still on average over 4 babies per woman per lifetime, practically twice the level needed for replacement fertility. The real growth of future manpower, labor force, population, as far as we can see in the world, is going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. But we've got a problem there, which is that education is achingly inadequate in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not just that there are big gaps in coverage for primary and secondary school. There's a big problem with quality of education. And until sub-Saharan Africa's educational level increases substantially, this last growth of human population before perhaps we head into global decline isn't going to be able to save everybody else in the win-win way that we hope for.
I've done a lot of reading on this, and that is always the area of the world that people look at, is sub-Saharan Africa. So it'll be interesting to learn more from you in terms of what we can do to try to prepare them for that. Thank you. We're going to, fabulous questions. So anyway. Luke, you did a great job of laying out what's driving the problem. So let's go to some of the solutions. You've had the pleasure, I'm sure you're going to tell our audience what a great pleasure it is to testify before Congress on these things. So maybe at the break we can, or afterwards, you can share some of your horror stories. But let's talk about what we could do about it, because we're getting pretty deep in everybody can kind of agree on the problems. So when you go to Congress and they say to you, so what do we do, young man? What are some of the things that you and other experts are telling Congress? Whether they'll do it or not, no guarantee, but what is it that you're telling people we're going to need to do?
Yeah, I can tell people anything in Congress, but whether they listen to me is not up to me. Yeah, I think that's a good question, and there's a few different, because the issues and the challenges are so multifaceted that there are a number of ways that we can approach the solutions. I mean, in terms of the problems that the demographic challenges, which are pretty much baked in, will present to our fiscal situation, I mean, it's pretty clear that we need to think about ways to restructure those systems going forward so that they're not driving the federal debt. I mean, that's a pretty clear problem that has a number of solutions. And again, it sort of gets to the political aspects in terms of how we implement them. I mean, just in terms of revenues into the system and the benefit formulas, we can talk about that. But the much more thorny challenge, which I think is interesting, is thinking about how we might be able to ease some of these demographic headwinds. And you can do that through immigration or by trying to raise the birth rate or see a reversal in the birth rate. And the immigration issue, I think, I don't want to appear naive. There's obviously political sensitivities that are there, but there are common sense reforms that the country can get behind. High skill immigration is a great way to increase the business dynamism that I've been talking about that can solve some of the congestion in the workforce. And on net, high skill immigrants contribute to federal revenue, so they can also ease our fiscal burden. And mixed skill immigrants can fill many of the jobs that are open, particularly in, say, healthcare. Immigrants make up about 11% of the workforce and 40% of all home health aides. And so there are really large and acute workforce gaps that immigrants can form. And so I think just there are common sense solutions even within this framework that immigration can solve. And then finally, I think broadly, the solutions to trying to make it easier for young families to feel like raising a family is both attainable and affordable is a lot about affordability and easing some of the constraints. Housing is a huge issue, and there's evidence that easing some of the housing affordability issues can reverse some of the decline in birth rates. It helps set the stage and make families feel like they have a place to begin to start a family. Child allowances, child tax credits, they don't have large effects, but I would say they're steps in the right direction, and even small changes in the birth rate over large periods of time can compound themselves, and they might not reverse the birth rate back to the replacement rate of 2.1 tomorrow, but over time, we can begin to build the momentum that puts us on the right path.
Good. And again, we'll get back to what's the likelihood any of this is going to turn into legislation, but we'll save that for a little later.
Fingers crossed.
Susan, it looks like a lot of what we're talking about in terms of what do we do about this is federal. So, that's where the income tax, the structure for the benefit programs, the growth. So what can the state do? What do you get, as Luke does, do you testify? Do you go to the state legislature or the governor's economic development council and say, look, we got to start doing X, Y, and Z, and if so, what are X, Y, and Z?
Yes, I do those things. I would say that the first step that we're not quite there, many people in the legislature are not quite there yet, is to kind of acknowledge that this slowdown is real and probably more or less permanent, and so to kind of fully grasp what that means in terms of budget planning and the provision of services. You saw that first graph. We have been growing for so long that it is ingrained so deeply in our heads that we don't really even understand what it means to grow slowly. And so I think that, I don't know how practical this is, but I think we need to keep coming back to the fact that we are in a different place than we were even 20 years ago. And what that means in terms of how we spend. We can't grow our way out of some of the challenges, and there'll be structural budget deficits that we're already seeing open up at the state level because of the aging population. I think that, that first, just acknowledge it first and just kind of sit with it and start thinking about what that means and what those policies are that we can put in place now before they get more painful in the future.
Well, just as a quick follow-up to both of you, Luke and Susan, is this new news, or do you feel that the policymakers know, that this is coming like a freight train, but they aren't going to do anything, or are they kind of saying, "Oh, really? Like we said, we thought overpopulation was the problem." I mean, how well informed are they to start doing something?
I'd say here there's a range of awarenesses, but I think people still don't really believe it until the budget constraint is in the same budget period. So I think they put it off and say, oh yeah, that sounds scary, that's coming. But I don't know that they really believe that this is permanent until it's right there and it's actually constraining their decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, this is a classic political problem where these are long-term challenges, and like you said, they're largely baked in. I mean, we can predict based on birth rates and immigration trends what the population will look like, but it's such a slow-moving, long-term ship that it's hard to get people to focus when they're when they have much shorter timelines on which they're trying to solve some issues. The one thing that I will say in terms of actual pushback that I often get is this question about whether or not it is actually, within the U.S. a decline in birth rates, or just we're seeing a decline in this measure of birth rates, and then eventually women will catch up. Because even in data released by the CDC, what we see is younger women are seeing a decline in the birth rates, but older women who are 35 to 44 and maybe even 30 to 44 are seeing an uptick in their births. And so a lot of this is a question of the overall decline in the birth rate versus a timing issue. And we do see older women having more children, but just not enough to make up for the decline in the birth rate among women in their 20s. And so we get to this point where women are prioritizing other things like their career, and all of that is great, but in the end, it's not going to result in the same number of children as before. So when I often get pushback that it's just a question of delay, and eventually, we will see birth rates reach back, but the data just doesn't back that up.
Kent, can I ask you a quick question? Because as Nicholas has pointed out in everything you read, sub-Saharan Africa, everybody says they're going to be providing the bulk of the workers for the future. I mean, they are really going to be in great demand. We'll get to migration in a minute. But you just told us a little while ago that they haven't got very accurate census. I mean, how confident are we that we, one, know the numbers of sub-Saharan population, or maybe we've got it from satellites, I don't know. And second, what do we know about the education? I mean, do we have pretty good records, any kind of census documents on how educated people are, or how much lack of education there is for the people that we're going to be looking to provide so much solution to this problem?
Yeah, I think Africa is the most challenging from a data point of view. I mean, I think it's ideal for any type of public policy and academic research to be based on empirical data and real sources, and not estimates. It's profoundly difficult as you go from country to country. There are developmental, cultural challenges to gathering this information or to sharing it. We see it. There's some bright spots. You know, data. Rich countries, South Africa, Tanzania are kind of leading the way in terms of being models for the rest of Africa. So I think there's some hope, and with every census round, it may get a little bit better here.
Just one quick follow-up. Is it a lack of money, or is it a desire not to know what the numbers are? Because, I mean, is there UN or some other organizations that could step in and try to do really good census since this is coming at us, or is that not viable?
Well, I mean, USAID was wiped out here, and so
We've gotten a question on that.
That contributed to many countries' census development here. At the same time that there's other problems in other parts of the world, the European or the Japanese or South Korean agencies. China has stepped in some areas, but I'm not sure that China is actually supporting census methodology, census planning. That's the European countries have, and the United Nations itself, but the United Nations budget is not going anywhere in a good place.
Okay. Nicholas, I know you and I have talked about birth rates and do incentives for larger families work. Would you share with the audience what have you seen around the world in terms of efforts that have been made to raise birth rates, and do they work? I mean, we've certainly heard about Hungary and other places.
It's a pretty political and therefore a pretty politicized argument that people have about this, even among some of the people who study this. I'm on the group that's kind of skeptical about the long-term demographic impact of pronatal economic benefits. I mean, it's kind of clear that if you are trying to reduce birth rates, you can do that through police power and bayonets, the way that China did with its one-child policy. That wasn't terribly pretty, and then the Chinese government eventually regretted it and suspended that. But as far as encouraging people to have more children, I'm fairly persuaded by some of the research that suggests that there's a fairly, not perfect, but a fairly good correspondence between the number of babies that women have on average in societies on the one hand, children they say they want on the other. And that's kind of reassuring because that means we're not rabbits, we're not robots, but it means that if you think you can have a proactive pronatal policy, there may be less scope for that than you'd think. Go around the world, Singapore's got a fairly expensive policy. They've got They've got less than one birth per woman per lifetime at the moment. They might say, well, it would have been even lower if we didn't have it. Putin came in with a very ambitious program about 2 decades ago, very expensive, but Russia's birth level is lower than when he started it. Orban's program in Hungary, you mentioned that, worked temporarily, but Hungary is now lower than when it started. Uh, the Scandinavian countries, I mean, per Norway House, have got some very generous benefits, pronatal benefits. But the Scandinavian demographers have this joke they tell. They talk about like the Swedish roller coaster. And what that means is you put a new benefit in place and the birth rate goes up temporarily as people kind of take a little bit of benefit because they were going to have a second child anyhow, but they kind of changed the timing. And then after that, the fertility level goes down below where it was before the program began. So there may be reasons that you want to have family support that win on their own merits. There may be reasons you want to have baby bonuses or a Trump baby account that win on their own merits. But I think you have to be skeptical about the long-term demographic impact of these sorts of interventions.
Well, one of the topics that has come up, and it's the number one topic of all the questions from the audience, and that's immigration. And so, who's the lucky? Let's see, Luke. Without getting too political, is immigration going to be a major factor that countries are going to be competing for workers? Do you think that will change some of our issues about immigration as this becomes more of a reality? I mean, we've had legitimate concerns about immigration, not just here, but in Europe after Syria. And I mean, you have crises, and then it's huge immigration patterns out of character. So we all know the reasons pro and con. But as you again testify or you make presentations, is that one of the absolute essential solutions to this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, going back to a little bit of what I said, when you look back, like, how does an economy grow? An economy grows through two ways: through population growth, through growth in labor supply, more workers, or through productivity growth, through those same amount of workers being able to produce more output. And within the U.S., the Congressional Budget Office projects that this natural population growth, the births minus deaths, will turn negative by 2030. So absent immigration, the U.S. population would be declining by 2030 within the next 4 years. And so, that is an immediate factor, and that, sort of necessitates the role of immigration in creating a growing, prosperous economy. Even looking historically, immigration has played a greater and greater role in driving the population growth that we've been seeing. Even 2 decades ago, I think nationally immigration accounted for about 20% of population, 25% of population growth. Over the past few years, it's been about half. Taking a few year average, and again, by the next 4 years, it will be 100% of our population growth, and that generates economic growth. That as an economist, I tend to think that more people generate more job opportunities for the general population. They create ideas. That creates technological and productivity enhancing advancements. And so, I think that I can go on about the virtues of immigration, but I think there's certainly a role for that within the context of the U.S. declining birth rate and soon natural population decline.
Actually, Nicholas, I'm going to ask you this one because we try to also tie together some of the subjects of past programs. One of our programs on global warming predicted that we will see very significant migration away from the equator. I mean, it's not within the next 10 years, which is what some of these numbers are telling us, but that we're going to have what they call climate migration. So as you look at the world situation, may one of, I hate to kind of say, can the problem in one area be the solution in another, but do you think that's going to be something that will will help the numbers, which is you're going to have, unfortunately, close to the equator, less habitable, and you're going to have a lot more population moving further into more habitable areas, and that's going to provide some of the immigrants needed for those countries that have declining birth rates?
Well, let's take the findings in your previous programs as given, because I haven't seen them and I certainly wouldn't want to adjudicate that. I think there's a rub here, which is that for the receiving countries, migration has to be a win-win situation for open societies to accept it, in democratic polity. And as I think I alluded to in talking about the educational situation in Africa, Houston, we've got a real problem. There are international studies, shout out in Stanford University, Professor Eric Hanashek, who's done wonderful work on this, trying to standardize the test score quality around the world. It's very hard to do, and you can shoot a lot of holes in it. You can see why it's not perfect, but it's not all noise either. In his research, he tentatively concludes that about 95% of the young people in sub-Saharan Africa do not reach what the international testers establish as level 1 of 1 through 5, different levels of skills. And what that means to me, as I try to understand this, is that while you've got an enormous surge coming in sub-Saharan Africa, it's going to be a very small fraction of that surge that will have the skills that will be demanded in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, in other places. Japan, for better or worse, just isn't that open to migrants. I think that's their loss, but I don't vote over there. So for a win-win situation to unfold, I think that improving education and skills in sub-Saharan Africa has to be a much larger priority than it has been over the past generation, because there's a huge benefit that can come for both sub-Saharan Africa and for rich countries. And one of the most important things that comes out of this is not just how it works in filling labor demand, let's say in the US or other countries, but the remittances that go back to sub-Saharan Africa from people who are working in countries overseas. It's a lot better than foreign aid, and in absolute terms, it's a lot bigger. So there are a lot of benefits that can come from this.
Is on? Okay. So if I listened, one of the challenges with having this younger population in parts of the world, whether it's around the equator and sub-Saharan Africa, that could fuel the immigration we need. All the countries that are facing this tsunami, the challenge is they're not educated enough to take up the job. So it would maybe they're going to, if they come, they're going to add even more to the social service demands. That's on the cost side, until I suppose the first generation or two, until you really get a population that's educated enough to step in. Is that correct?
We'll put it this way: if people coming from sub-Saharan Africa or other countries to the U.S. are coming for job openings, they're going to have job skills to fit the job openings, and that's a much that looks as if it's going to be a much smaller fraction of the rising cohorts in the sub-Saharan Africa than one might have expected. So there may be constraints that we haven't even begun to think about that will fall into place unless we have, unless we see much more attention to improving knowledge and skills and what we might call knowledge capital in sub-Saharan Africa in particular.
Our audience is very well informed, and so the bulk of the questions were about immigration, so no doubt about that. But we're seeing some questions about AI, and could AI make this worse? That's one of the questions. Or is AI going to lead to a whole different revenue stream in the United States? In other words, you're going to have robot taxes, you're going to have greater tax on the tech companies that are taking the jobs, and they're going to create a revenue stream that we just don't have right now. Again, I'm not requiring you to make that happen, but are you seeing it? Are you hearing on either the state level or the national level any discussion of that, of sort of, we got two freight trains coming, and one of them may be able to help us with the other one?
I'll let the economist go first, and then maybe I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah. I mean, admittedly, as I think about this question, sometimes and it's a natural question the way you framed it, which is,
Yep.
We've just outlined this huge demographic challenge. There's problems both with revenue and with the workforce, and we have this huge new technology coming that might be able to do the jobs that humans do and create new revenue streams. And so I often get it kind of framed in the way of like, will AI get us out of this demographic crunch that we're in right now? And I'm a little bit hesitant in a few different respects. First of all, just like taking that question head on, I think right now there's a ton of uncertainty about the path of AI, what it can do. I'm somebody who's pretty optimistic that within the long term, AI, just seeing its advances, will eventually get to that point where we have some sort of intelligence that can do most of the tasks that humans do. But the question of business adoption is one that is really important. We can have this technology, but the extent to which businesses are able to actually incorporate it into their operations will determine the labor market effects. And then the second part is that even within that kind of framework, there are what the role for humans is really important. And I think there will always be a role for humans in the economy. First of all, just in human-facing jobs. Talking about home health aides, which brings the question of immigration back. Like at least for the largely foreseeable future, we will always have demand for human healthcare workers, and that will grow as the population continues to age. And so that's one respect. And in the second way, every past technological advancement has created new jobs on net, and that's because this concern arises from the fact that it is really easy to envision a job being automated away. You can see software engineers and Cloud Code can now do what they've done, and so it's easy to imagine that job being automated away. But every past technological advancement has also increased demand for new work. 10 years ago, we would have no idea what an AI prompt engineer does. Like, that's a combination of words that wouldn't have made any sense to us. But that's a job title today. And I'm fairly confident that we will likely see the creation of new job titles and demand for new sorts of work and human expertise. And AI can kind of do what we're able to do at the frontier white collar jobs right now, but there will be demand for new sources of expertise, and humans will find new ways to contribute productively to the economy. And so I guess to wrap up what's been a somewhat long answer, I am actually somewhat hesitant to sort of join this train that AI will somehow get us out of these demands or this demographic crunch.
Have you, just before you give up the mic, are you hearing anything in Congress about we're going to restructure our tax system because somebody's going to have to be taxed for eliminating these jobs? I mean, and they're calling it the robot tax, or else just huge corporate taxes on the few tech companies that are making all this money off of these. So I mean, is there any talk about that, or is that just the tail and the dog is the problem? Is the demographic problem?
Yeah, politicians love to talk about taxes. So, but I will say that there is that beginning, because take for instance the scenario in which there are no many workers are automated away, then the labor income that we use as our primary source of federal income tax will go away. And so we need to think about new sources of revenue. And that's something that we're starting to think about. And I think the conversation needs to happen today because these changes are coming fast, and they come in the form of automation taxes, robot taxes, taxes on data centers, those sorts of things. And so that's all to say those conversations are coming. I think we need to have an evidence-based conversation about which taxes are going to collect revenue while continuing to generate growth, because AI and this new technology is a source of strategic competitiveness for the U.S. too. So we don't, we have to balance a few things, but we are starting to hear, those sorts of conversations happen.
Susan, you wanted to comment, and I have a question for you that just came in. Yeah, go ahead.
You covered what I was going to say just about face-to-face interactive kinds of work that won't be replaced. But I also wanted to note that where Minnesota is right now, everyone is kind of not knowing where this is going. The point, like the planners right now at the state are figuring out how we get our arms around even just how to take in the information about what's changing and what to do with it. So we're kind of creating the connective tissue about what to do with it, but we're not even to the point where you would say, and this is the tax. Everyone's just kind of like, how do we get our arms around it, and how can we work together to get our arms around it? So I just say that's kind of the state of things at the state level, and maybe at the federal level too.
Okay, well, I have a question for you from the audience, which I haven't read about, and I think it's an interesting possible solution. Is some of the problem the huge urbanization we have? And since people can work from anywhere, if we see more people moving out of big urban areas into smaller communities or even just rural areas, one, will that drive down the cost of, I'm adding a little bit now, but will that drive down the cost of housing? Will it make raising more children actually seem to be easier than, in very expensive big urban areas? Is there any discussion among state demographers that, maybe we could encourage some I don't want to call it de-urbanization, but a relocation of workers to different areas in which maybe their lifestyle will be more amenable to reducing some of the issues of this?
I will say that the cost of living is lower in the more rural parts of the state, that's true, but they have the same housing issues as the urban areas have. And so, you hear from employers in small towns, I could hire 20 more people, but there's no place for them to live. And so I would say that that housing issue is going to need to be tackled before people can migrate back or out to those rural areas. That's really what the holdup is right now.
I have another political hot potato. I think it's sometimes called the fifth rail, but I'm not sure. I must have 5 questions here on, we've had a Social Security system since the 30s. We've had a Medicare system since the 60s, and they can count heads. Why hasn't there been changes made to make sure that we can fund our Medicare? Or I would guess the younger generation say, why hasn't there been changes made to change the benefits? But either way, if the social commitment to seniors is one of the drivers, why hasn't somebody been working on this and doing something? Because you can see it coming. Anyway, it's around that. Why is this a problem? Why hasn't somebody fixed this sooner? Anyway, that's the gist of these several questions.
I mean, I think it's a combination. I mean, the issue is pretty perfectly designed, not for nobody to want to take up this this problem. It's a long, simmering issue. It is it's very Social Security is politically popular. It has a constituency that cares a lot about this program, and so the incentives aren't designed for any single person to take up the mantle of reforming Social Security. So I think I'll say 2 things, which is, first of all, we do have a forcing mechanism for people to do for Congress to do something, which is 2032, 34, when the Social Security Trust Fund is expected to be exhausted, at which point benefits will be cut on average by 24% by law. So something is going to need to be done unless we just see a benefits cut. So that we do have a forcing mechanism coming up. And secondly, I think it's just a matter of designing the institutions to create the political will to do something. I mean, looking in the 1980s, the last time that the Social Security system was actually reformed to improve its solvency, that was a bipartisan deal, and it wasn't necessarily a time of great bipartisanship, but there was an issue that was urgent and pressing, and it was a time where there were certain responsible actors and leaders that could come together and form a solution, and it was bipartisan. And I think, as naive as that may sound, it's actually going to need to be the case that happens, because there's not incentives for any single party to take up the issue, but it's going to have to be a bipartisan source of agreement. And there's ways you can design these changes so they don't affect current beneficiaries, and to phase in increases in revenue, and that's probably the contours of what you're going to see. But the answer to your question is just the institutions that we have aren't designed to take up this sort of issue until it is the very last minute.
Nicholas, I'll give you the last question, because you study the world. Is anybody innovative and creative in dealing with this? I mean, it's clear that it's a problem around the world. Is there any area, either countries that you would point to, or any, God forbid, international alliances where people are working together and thinking about this? Is there anything hopeful on that end?
Generally speaking, the countries and societies that are successful in dealing with current challenges and surprises tend to be well positioned for dealing with the demographic pressures that are coming at them as well. I mean, look at a place like Singapore, although its fertility level is well less than half of what's required for population stability over the long run. Look at Switzerland. Look at the countries that kind of like are at the top of the international global competitive indices. The United States has got a lot of great, great attributes in terms of global competitiveness, great entrepreneurship, great knowledge production. We're a fantastic magnet for talent from abroad when we let that happen. But we've also developed a lot of really bad habits over the last generation. And part of them, I think, pertain to this discussion of Social Security and Medicare. It's not just the actuarial imbalances in those programs that we see today. You've got to remember that we have gotten very comfortable with running a federal budget deficit that's on the order of 6% of GDP a year, even when we're in a kind of like an upcycle, even when we're in the an expansion part of the business cycle, and our options are going to narrow very quickly if we don't bite the bullet and learn to live within our means, because the demographic pressures are just going to make everything a whole lot less fun if we do it later rather than now.
From your lips to somebody's. We certainly hope our members of Congress are listening to you. So, well, I may have started 5 minutes late, but I'm going to get you out promptly by 8:30. So I want to thank all of our panelists for an excellent discussion. And well, let's give them all a big round of applause. This is the Norway House, and so we have a lovely handmade gift for each of you. Nicholas will send you yours, and I don't know if you can see it, but and this is called our Viking, or our ale bowl, and we're assuming it was all for good fellowship. That is as far as we know. But we would like to acknowledge who made it. We have local artists, Lucy and Jean Tokheim. And the ale bowl is, according to our Norwegian traditionalists here, it is a traditional Norwegian symbol of community, celebration, and hospitality. And we hope that's what you felt you had here this night. So each of you will be receiving one, and Nicholas will make sure you get yours as well. So enjoy. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of a lot of people and also thank them. So we have several members of the Norway House Board of Directors here tonight. Would you please stand if you're on the Norway House Board of Directors? And don't be shy, okay? We also have members of the executive team from the Norway House here. So Christina Carlton, who's the CEO and president of the Norway House, and Britt Ardakani, who is the head of development for the Norway House and is the team member who works directly with the Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee. So would both of you stand? And they're usually in the back because they're doing all the work. So. Mark Knapp, would you please stand? Mark is the chairman of the Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee, and we thank him very much for his leadership. In addition to having a very busy full-time job that often involves global travel, 2 small boys, Mark also devotes hours and hours of time to the Minnesota Peace Initiative program so that you get the quality of the program we get here tonight. So we want to thank Mark very much for his leadership. We have several of our committee members here tonight, so would the members of the Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee please stand? And please stay standing because I have a couple more committee mentions. So if the committee members keep standing, I also have an honorary committee member here tonight. Jean Porter, will you stand? Where's Jean? There she is. Jean is, stay standing, not only my assistant, but she's my right-hand man and right-hand person, and she has for 20 years, because we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, she has done so much for the production of these events. So she's an honorary member of our committee. So that's why I had her stand with the committee. Okay, thank you very much. And speaking of our committee, all of us in the Minnesota Peace Initiative community want to take a moment to remember a really important member of our committee who has passed away since our last program. Bill Bledsoe was a member of our Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee from the very beginning, and he led our marketing and our publicity efforts. And we were blessed because he came with decades of marketing and publicity experience and expertise from Dayton's. And so we were easy after all he'd done for Dayton's. He was a legend in the community, and he contributed to the Minnesota Peace Initiatives Committee with his creativity and his love of life. And despite his Parkinson's diagnosis, Bill kept working and supporting the Minnesota Peace Initiative right up to the end. And so we appreciate it all so much. Bill, we miss you, and we all send you our very best. So let's have a round of applause for Bill Bledsoe. And I'm going to send you off with some great news. As I said, 2026 is the 20th anniversary of the Minnesota Peace Initiative. And to celebrate, we are launching a new peace program. We have wanted for some time to expand our horizons and launch an annual global peace forum in partnership with the Norwegian Peace Organization. And therefore, we're using our 20th anniversary as a springboard to launch the very first Global Peace Forum. And it will be held here on Thursday, November 19th. And our topic is The New World Order. Where are we headed? And we all know we're going through a period of great change in our world, and we feel it every day. And our journey from the industrial age to the digital age is well underway, and it is changing everything. We are building a very impressive program to help us better understand and deal with this change. And we're going to bring together an all-star roster of speakers to give us their best assessment of this emerging new world order and what it will mean for every corner of the world. We're putting a strong focus on the younger generations, which we discussed in tonight's program, because they have the greatest stake in preparing for what lies ahead. So we will soon be announcing our program, our speakers, and our Norwegian partner. And we hope you will put November 19th on your calendar and plan on joining us. And our long-term goal is to grow GPF into a world-recognized global event. Minnesota has deep Scandinavian roots, and they nourish our commitment to peace and peacemaking. They give us the confidence to believe that Minnesota and the Norway House can serve as a convener for rich, open discussions of how we build a more peaceful world. And are you ready to stand up? Paul, stand up. Paul is our leader of the Global Peace Forum. Paul Jackson, member of the Norway House Board. He's a member of the board, and he is the head of the Global Peace Forum. And he has assured me, as my 4-year-old granddaughter used to assure me, easy peasy. So we're going to hold him to it. So anyway, thank you very much for your commitment to it, Paul. So as a final note from the 20th anniversary of the Minnesota Peace Initiative, I want to tell you personally, and on behalf of our committee, and on behalf of the Norway House team, and on behalf of the Norway House board, we really, really, really appreciate your loyal support and attendance. In talking to many of you tonight, I know many of you have been loyal members and come to many of our programs. So we really, really appreciate it. And we hope you will come back to our next Minnesota Peace Initiative program. And we look forward to seeing you at that time. And as you know, we always say at the end, the Minnesota Peace Initiative was established because democracy is not a spectator sport. We believe everyone needs to be informed and engaged to support our democracy. So please join us for our next program. If it's happening in the news, we'll be talking about it at the Minnesota Peace Initiative. Thank you all very much. Take care. Thank you very much.